Welcome everybody to KC Happy Hour, episode 88. We are on the cusp of a big KC summer stretch. We have 8 straight weeks of racing coming your guys' way every single weekend, and then even after that, a gap week and 2 more. So it's going to be an action-packed here starting, whole summer stretch, starting this weekend for Memorial Day weekend. A lot of news, obviously, over the last couple days. There was a lot of racing last week, a lot of big regional numbers with especially events kind of being close together that I thought was really cool. And we'll get into that a little bit later on in the show. We've got Ryan Norberg and Braden Eves. They're going to come on, obviously, earlier this week, coming out with the official Supernats location and dates. I thought it'd be fun to kind of hash out. We've talked about it on previous shows months back, usually right before those temporary races come around, whether it's Winter Tour or the Vegas events of kind of input on track design. But to have 2 guys, Braden Eves, a guy who's run up front, put it on the poll, Ryan Norberg, who got run up front and won Supernats in 2021, to kind of give their thoughts on layouts. And I was hoping to be able to get a few more shifter guys in. I think I'm going to do that a little bit closer to the event, because there's 2 different styles and 2 different types of tracks that kind of favor single speed versus the gearbox carts and all, and have a lot of fun just playing fantasy track designer with it. But that's a lot later on. One interview I've been wanting to do for a little while, long overdue really for how long I've known her, is Brittany Lobaugh, the owner of the Texas Sprint Racing Series. Brittany, first of all, obviously move-in day, so thanks for the time. You're trackside right now, so I appreciate it.
Yes. Good to be on.
So, so much cool stuff, I think, to go into, right? The series has obviously been healthy, has been doing really good. And, for the last couple of years, you've been in the sport for a while. Your husband, Tim, runs a karting shop and team as well. So it's been your life for a bit. But to give everybody a little background on it, as being around the sport for so long, first kind of your story as in a nutshell as you can up until taking over and leading the series, and then a bit in the TSRS background. So how does, a woman like yourself end up leading all of us boys inside men's bodies on the go-kart track?
Well, my brother actually raced for a long time before I ever met my husband. That's where I was at the track first. That's actually how I met my husband, was at a go-kart track of all places in Italy. But that's a whole nother story. But yeah, I started traveling at the racetrack, like to different racetracks with my husband. Well, when we were dating, and I ended up kind of working with some of the different series and behind the scenes doing registration and different stuff like that. And there was TSRS was kind of born, and I was asked to join in and kind of help out. And then the other partners kind of decided it wasn't really as much as what they wanted to do. And I was kind of taking it over. So I did. And just kind of kept moving through the motions. When SKUSA kind of lost some traction here in Texas, I was able to get the IKF and the SKUSA banner back here and bring it back to what it is now. And this year we've added some new classes, well, some old new classes back, and there's been some big pushes on those classes, like whole grassroots effort. Like everybody's trying to get their friends here because they want to be racing. They want somewhere local to be doing it.
Right. And I want to get into that too a little bit, but I think touching on, would you be willing to share a little bit of the story of the Rotax Worlds where you ended up meeting Tim? Was that like a last minute plan for you to go and support? Because was Louis racing that one?
Yeah, my brother Louis Pagano was racing that race. And so I'm like, well, heck yeah, I'm going to go to Italy. But the funny thing is I went ahead of time, like with my dad and his mechanic and my brother, and my mom and the rest of the girls couldn't come until later. So I actually did more of the race and they did more of the travel. And not knowing too many people there, I ended up hanging out with Tim a lot of the race while we were watching it and hanging out because he was there supporting, his drivers, which he wasn't working for my brother, but my brother ran on the Burrell back then with him. And so we just ended up talking, but we didn't actually date until 2 years later, right before we went to the Portugal Worlds. So we didn't start dating until 2 years after Italy. But we stayed in touch and talked to, I think, Supernax the next year. And, all over, every time you're at one of those big races, you see the people that you've met, right? So, but yeah, everybody jokes, wait, you met your husband in Italy? I'm like, yeah, at a go-kart race. Cause,
Yeah. And how early were you, beyond Louis, was your parents or anyone else kind of in karting at all before it, or did he get in and he was kind of the first one into racing and that kind of started bringing you out to the track?
Yeah, my brother was the first one racing in our family. I mean, my dad had always been a big fan of racing, so we were always at Cal Speed for all the NASCAR races and all that kind of stuff. But until Louis started racing, that was when we kind of got more into it as a whole family and stuff. And then I really, as he got a little older and more fun places to go. I mean, how do you pass up a trip to Italy or Portugal, right?
Right. So was there
I
ever any interest for you to drive alongside him when he was getting started?
Oh, when he was started, I was about 16, so I had my real car at the time, and that was sort of more where I was at. But there's been, everybody always asks, like, did you race? I'm like, not on the track, really. I mean, I've done a little bit here and there, but my son tried it a little bit. He's not sure yet. I think he'll end up, trying it again a little later, but right now he just enjoys coming and playing at the track and just thinks it's super cool. So
And so you get in, when do you start working for those series, right? Is that kind of after you'd gotten married with Tim, when you guys were dating? Was it like an excuse to be able to get to go to more tracks and more places?
well, when we first started dating, I was actually finishing up my teaching degree and I ended up tutoring at the track. So actually most of the young kids, I tutored them a lot. Some of them are not even racing anymore, but Gold was one of the ones I tutored, and Tyner and Bruckner, and a lot of those kids from that group, I tutored them while Tim was working. And then when we weren't needing that as much, then I started working for like TP Casey and some of those before like when Dave Polly was running it and stuff back when we first moved to Texas. So we moved to Texas for racing a week after we got married.
Wow.
So, but yeah, so then, it just kind of kept going. I wasn't tutoring as much because I was working and all that. And then when I was asked to help with this series, I was like, yeah, I can do this. So
And now you're in obviously pretty deep, having
now,
owned and managed and run the series for quite some time. So, you mentioned obviously the original partners in TSRS, they were kind of getting out of it. Was well, I want to keep it going for everybody. Well, oh wow, this really interests me. Like, how were you when you first, kind of took over and then led the ship?
I felt like I could really, take this series to the next level. It was, it was a really fun, like grassroots thing. And I think when I started, there was like 60 entries a weekend. And, and we got it up to like 80. And then everybody was, a lot of the people that were the original partners also ran teams, and they kind of quickly realized that it's really difficult to run a team and a series at the same time. There's really just not enough time while you're at the track. So, we came to an agreement that they were going to keep their teams and I was going to do this. And that was right around the time that we partnered up with IKF in the beginning, and that really kind of stepped us up. And then, like I said, when TPKC kind of decided they were done, we got with SKUSA and said, hey, let's run both banners. Let's keep it going here. Like, let's not let it fail.
Yeah, that's one thing I think, it's been a few years since TPKC went away. And so TSRS at the beginning, it was almost like Texas kind of had, an upper half regional, upper budget. TPKC was the SKUSA brand that ran the X30 classes. KA really hadn't just started yet. I mean, by the time KA was coming in, it was already just about just down to you guys. You guys were mainly
Yes.
206 racing at the beginning, had Mini Swift, would kind of have X30 here and there, but the numbers wouldn't be as big, right? It was more
Correct.
of the lower end budget. So, we've talked about that a lot on this show. I know it's something that probably weighs on your mind quite a bit of like, I think business term would say like target market, but really it's about kind of serving the racers. That you were serving one specific audience, one specific group, and then all of a sudden broadened and broadened. So how much over the last few years progression do you kind of weigh the balance of that out? Because there's a totally different way that a CKNA race is run versus a SKUSA Pro Tour is run. You have something with a lot higher entry fee, a lot more staff, a full video system, and then CKNA is still run well when they do their nationals, but at the regional level, I mean, their stuff is still as low of an entry fee as they can do it while still having proper tech and a race director. And so you've kind of danced the middle now, right? Upgrading more and more staff at the same time to kind of serve the upper guys, but trying not to alienate the original audience. So is that something that's weighed on you the last few years?
Yeah, it's really a fine line trying to keep, the grassroots and the guys that are coming out of the back of their truck. I mean, even like you have like our last race, we had the shifters come, and you had people that could potentially be running big budgets like Supernats races, like Jordan Musser, who literally drove down in the back of his truck and worked out of his truck all weekend. So it's cool to see, some of the big names that still want to do that type of racing. And we try to keep it budget friendly. And I try, yes, things change and we have to adjust costs to try to account for that. But I try to still make it to where it's a small amount, or I'm not raising everything all the time, or, making it so it's still, worth it for the little guys where, we only make you buy tires once a year. You can decide what you want to do after that. And things like that.
And,
So
the series too, even, right, track wise has had to change because of the size of the series, right? You go back to the original years, was able to go to, what's the track over by
Waco.
Waco? Yeah. Small little old school
Mhm.
go-kart track, small paddock, right? That could fit the 60, 80 entries and was perfect for the size of the 206 carts, but it's tight for anything faster. And even, NTK over the last few years has at the time with the KA class pulling 40 seniors. This year is going to be another 30 plus, or at least right around that mark for them, for juniors getting bigger, and you're having
Right.
black flags for lap traffic and everything. So that's, I'm sure, a big part of the balance every year with the schedule.
Well, yeah, all of that is difficult, making sure the track's big enough to hold enough, making sure the paddock's big enough to hold enough, and trying to make it still good racing and safe. People, I know some of the racers get frustrated if they get black flagged, but we do try to wait But I've seen way too many incidents all over the country where somebody's like, "Oh, I'll wait and like be nice and not pull this guy off," and then bam, like the front runners just ram right into them, or they're trying to go around and it's a battle, and one of like the guy gets nervous, it's kind of going slow and doesn't really know what to do, and it messes up the whole run. Not that the leaders are the only one racing, but it's really dangerous.
Yeah, it's so tough, right? Because at the regional level is the mix of like both, I mean, you have guys that are spending, a good amount. They're using it as training for a national light, basically, and
Right.
they're running at the front of the field. So it's again, in most of the classes now, at least the top 5 guys go and travel to a level above TSRS. So they're expecting, high level racing amongst themselves, and they want it almost officiated like that. And then at the other end, you have brand new guys, pickup truck guys that are only a couple, half a season into club racing, maybe not even that sometimes showing up, and you're trying to balance both because regionals where they both meet, So
Absolutely. So, like we try to make sure we have really good tech, and we try to make sure that, we have all of that stuff for them. And we try to make sure that the heat races are maybe short enough that nobody's getting black flagged till the final, unless they really had a bad moment out there. But, even like keeping the kid carts around, we love those little guys.
yeah. And you even tweaked the format a little bit this year, right? Wasn't last year we just had, was it 2 heats last year and then a main with an extra practice session?
Yeah, so I think we ran that for 1 or 2 years. I'd have to go back and double check. But previously, we had always done 3 heats. And as we kind of adjusted and did some things and had some tracks where we had some, hard end times and things like that, we had to adjust to make sure we could get the most time out there for everybody. And the tracks this year don't have the time constraints and the things like that, so we were able to go back to the 3 heats and give people a little more like actual racing rather than just that extra practice session.
Right, because that's the one thing I like about the format here. I've actually used you and talking with a lot of other regional series about the race format, because it's just enough practice sessions in the morning that if you're relatively familiar with the track, you don't have to be there on Friday. It's optional, and it has been, but it's
Right.
still a good amount of seat time, and you can get out enough heats where one bad one doesn't ruin the whole weekend. Because everyone's used to what's been the standard for so long of a double main event format where, okay, bad Saturday, turn it into a good Sunday. TSRS is almost, has it always been just the one final with a lot of practices Saturday to give, at least just a 2-day format potentially for people?
Yeah, I mean, even in the beginning when more classes were combined and all of that, it's always been like a 2-day format, and you always qualified on Saturday and typically ran 1 heat, sometimes 2, depending on, which way it worked, and then, finished up on Sunday. And there's been times where we've done the 2 heats on Saturday and then finished, up the next day. And we've kind of played around with how it worked, depending on how many sessions we had to fit in there. So when we had only a handful of people out there each time and could combine all the classes, you only had 6 or 7 run groups, you can run an extra practice session. Now we have 11 run groups.
Right. I mean, it's even with the night race, right? We're still having to start off, at 1 p.m. We're going to run till about 11:30, hopefully,
Yes.
fingers
Yes.
crossed, no delays
Very
on
much.
anything, especially on track related. But I mean, it's a lot to balance. Obviously, we've just laid out a lot of the stuff that you kind of have to go through every year, from track selection to managing and doing your best to try and keep 200 racers happy every weekend, which is never going to be possible because not everybody can win. So I see it sometimes with promoters that have been in the game for so long, because you can put on a really good event, it can run good, and you would think, okay, you're going to get a lot of thanks, but it's almost an expectation to be a good event. So the only feedback you'll get the week after busting your butt to put the whole event together is the negative feedback from the handful of people that got wrecked and didn't get a penalty call, or got a penalty they didn't feel like they deserved, or something issue in tech or whatever with the weekend. And I can see very easily how, you can get burned out on the whole thing. So year to year, how bad is that to manage? But more than anything, what keeps you, and motivated to kind of keep coming back and putting all the work in to put it on each year?
I mean, I honestly actually get quite a lot of compliments at the beginning of the weekend, which actually helps to motivate me. And if I only get like 3 to 5 negative emails at the end of the weekend, I feel like it's successful because, at least people still feel open enough. Generally, they're nice emails. They're not happy, but they're still relatively nice. And I want to hear that feedback. I want to know, because if people are just talking and not telling me, I can't fix it, right? I mean, my goal every race is to find my problem areas and make them better the next time. So I'm constantly trying to find new ways to do more and do other things. And get creative and, make sure that the event is fun for everybody. And if I miss a step somewhere, I mean, we all do it. We all have moments where you're like, damn, that sucked, right? But you just have to step up and do better the next time. My husband will tell you the beginning of the year when I'm trying to get everything together, he's like, this is not worth it. And then like after the first race, he's like, okay, it might be worth it, because it's, some of these promoters have huge teams of people helping them in the back end. I've got a handful of people, but mostly they don't help till we're on site. I'm doing most of it before we get there.
Right. I mean, there's so much that goes into it all to trying to just, keep the wheels greased. And then on top of that, you have all the relationships, everybody, you have to make sure that you touch everyone's hand as many as you can, from both during the weekend, but leading into it, to keep everyone motivated to keep coming back, along with just operating the whole thing. I mean, it's a double-edged sword. So I want to get into it more. We have our first commercial break really quickly, and then we'll come right back. So with that, everyone, stay tuned. We'll be right back here with Brittany Lobaugh. And then, of course, later on in the show, we'll be talking a little more about Supernats 26. So stick with us. Don't settle for a national engine builder. Take care of yourself with an international one. SRP Engines is a global industry leader in engine services, specializing in engine formulas such as KZ, OK, OKJ, and Mini 60. SRP Engines is the engine of choice for Magic Kart USA and helped power North America's #1 ranked pro shifter driver AJ Myers to the 2021 Superkarts USA Pro Tour National Championship. SRP Engines can also service any spec engine class of your choice, including IAME and ROC divisions. However, if you're looking for the absolute choice when it comes to KZ shifter engines, there is nobody better. For more information, contact Amar Sanada at srp-engines.com. KC Happy Hour is proudly presented by the Rock Sonoma Karting Championship, presented by Cameron Race Promotions, the most competitive Northern California karting series. Featuring a 2-day format with practice on Saturday and racing on Sunday, multiple track configurations, and a massive prize structure including tickets to Rock Vegas, race car test opportunities, and race rewards. Rock Sonoma is the training ground of multiple national karting champions each year and race car champions as well. Featuring a full Rock Cup USA class structure with each race weekend streamed live via YouTube, it's a series you cannot miss. For more info, check us out online at zanzarukarting.com. All right, everybody, welcome back. Here we have Brittany Lobaugh, the owner and operator and everything else for the Texas Sprint Racing Series until things get onto site, here live from us. So we're just starting to get into a little bit more about this season. So first, my question to you, how do you rate, the year kind of so far as it's come together? We're still early, in the season, obviously, but, we've got a pretty bam stretch coming up with one race a month over the next, couple months. It's basically. So how do you rate 2023 so far compared to years past, compared to where you wanted to be? How do you describe it?
I actually think we're on track this year. The first race, without, with all the changes and everything, we still had, I think we ended up with 197 for that race. Without being back to back, I think Last year, our first race being back to back with SKUSA Pro Tour, we were at 220. So that's still great numbers without the back to back. We had a lot of new faces last race, which is always really cool to see. And we've had this whole like movement to bring back 206 heavy and shifters. So it's kind of exciting to have some of the new classes back, or old classes back, I guess. They've been off and on. Like, it's been several years since we had shifters, but they're out there sharing posts and trying to get everybody. They've got a whole group on some chat that they're like, come on. It's amazing. It's fun to see like that they want to be here, right?
Yeah,
It's not me doing it.
Right. I was gonna say, how proud and how cool for that is that for you to see other people like championing your events, right? To get more people to come out and race in them.
Yeah, I mean, somebody was like, "Oh, I shared your post." I was like, "What are you talking about? I don't have a post that was scheduled for today." And they're like, "Yeah." I was like, "That's not me. That's somebody shared my event, but cool. Like, yay!" It's really fun to see that people are super excited about racing, and it's not just me promoting and like talking to social world, out there.
So, obviously, it's in a positive state. You're on a
Yeah.
lot of momentum, but you look back over the progress over the years. Is there anything that was kind of like a really big lesson or learning moment for you as a series promoter, as an owner? If you could think back, whether it was a failure by any way or just something that was like, we missed it here and we learned a lot from it.
I think that every mistake that's made, I mean, because there have been a handful, not more than a handful, I'm sure. But I learn and I grow. We had a couple big moments last year. And now we have some new staff members that come to help, to help. It's for me, it's like, okay, how much can we do with a small amount of staff before we really have to step it up? Because when you talk about the smaller budget and trying to stay in line with the right pricing, having the right staff, but but also filling all the positions you need. It's a fine line with making sure that you can do all the things. And it's, when you've got 60, 80, even 100, like I could wear a lot more hats than I can when we're at 150, 200 entries. I have to get those people in those positions to where I can't be in 3 places at once anymore.
And, having not raced yourself, but having been around it for so long, do you feel like, you have to work a little harder or be a little nicer to kind of get the benefit of the doubt or respect from people? I feel like, when race directors or series owners are so recently on the other side, on the competitive side of the fence, whether they were like a team owner or a coach or like a driver, when they go and they make a racing related decision or talk about it, like people respect it more. Like for me, when I was doing more active officiating and working for different events, I always felt like it was easier for me to have tougher conversations with parents, and get like them to, believe that I know what I'm talking about. If they saw me with a helmet on or a suit on, within the last year or 2 years, like they remember that side. So, as someone that's been around it, no doubt knows what you're talking about, but, do you feel like you have to struggle more? Is it pretty good now that you've been so established as a series owner? Like, is there any stuff like that?
Sometimes, I think as like a woman in racing, sometimes that's part of the battle, right? Is being taken more seriously, that you actually can hang with the big boys. But I try to make sure I really know my rule book and I know all of that stuff. But I also try to make sure I hire staff that is more knowledgeable on the track stuff, because I know that I have gaps, right? Like that's not my expertise. My expertise is the promoting and the back end stuff. And I love the racing and I love watching it. And, when people show me what's happening, like I agree or disagree with the calls and I can have the conversations, but I don't want to be officiating, right? Like that's not where where my that's not my best effort, right? Like that's so I need to have the right people in place to do the officiating. When we talk about tough calls, I go and review videos. I talk to lots of different sources that have the more expert, opinion on the driving. I'm looking at rule books and I want to make sure I know where we stand. So if somebody explains that to me, I'm like, okay, back it up with the rule, right? Because I have a master's degree. So when I want to make a point, I want to find something like if somebody were to come to me in writing, nope, see, it's right here in black and white. This is how it works. So I try to make sure I have that in my back pocket to where even though I may not have the driving skill, I, have a lot of the other background stuff.
And as a woman in racing, right? Like you look at the promoting industry, it's a lot of older white guys in their 50s and above. So I
Yes.
know, there's a lot of hats you wear. There's a lot, you're a mom, you're a wife, you are a promoter, wife of a team owner as well, but you've been around it. But how cool is it now to know that, all the little girls that come and race at your event, see a woman leader, leading the entire event. Like, do you think about that? Do you get to see that a little bit, that's such a cool position you get to be in?
It's really cool seeing more and more women and little girls racing out there, right? Like it wasn't very long ago that you barely saw one or two, right? Like we were looking at some stuff and the big name that always popped out before was just Danica. Like for 20 years ago, she was one of the very few. There were a couple others that did well, but not as many that people remember, right? And then now you've got all these women promoting racing, and it's really cool to see the girls that started with us moving up into women in racing and seeing all the places they're going. And I love that I was a part of that. And I mean, even the little boys too, right? They're great too.
Right,
There's
right.
just a whole lot more of them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's another part that you get to be, not just on their way up to the national stuff in karting, but when they move on, when they maybe stop driving, or if they do and they get into car stuff, but even if they don't, if they work in it, we think like from my generation, most recently, Morgan Healy and Ashley O'Hara Bush are from the East Coast over in Florida. Ashley
Exactly.
high up in SRX, total badass businesswoman, obviously great race car driver. And she's been in race control in nearly every single professional motorsport event in the last 2 years at some point or another. Morgan in the same way through IMSA, through USAC. And then, you look at all the other girls as well that are starting to really, kick butt, even on the younger side, on the national scene coming up. But all your drivers, when they come out of Texas, when they're a TSRS driver and they kind of wear your brand proudly, whether it's the merch or to say that you're from, you most recently on our stuff with us pushing the X30 senior, the shifter, Elio Meza, what a great kid. And do you take a lot of pride in that too? I'm sure you do, of all the graduates of the series in a way.
Oh my gosh, it's so awesome to see how far they go. And then I love, like, I'll be at Super Nats and people I haven't seen in years come up and just like give me hugs. I'm like, oh my God, how are you that big? Right? I mean, I watch my kids grow and you think like, man, they grow so fast. But like these kids that are now like drinking at the bar with me, right? And you're like, wait, what happened? How are we here?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
so
I'm
cool to
sure.
see their progression and or to watch them on TV and see all the stuff that they're doing now, and you're like, hey, I met you when you were this big. Like, it's so fun. Or I tutored you, or you raced my series, whatever it is, all that fun stuff.
So both at being in the position you're at, overall, but also during a race weekend, do you have a specific favorite part of, the experience of owning and running a series, putting on events or seeing people outside of it? Like, you go through a race week, and I'm sure probably one of the best parts is that it's gone successfully by the end of Sunday. But, are there any other moments or parts of a race weekend that, really stick out to you, stuff you look forward to?
I mean, I really like when everybody first pulls in, they're usually like in the best spirits. They're so excited to be there. There's lots of smiles and hugs and thank you so much for putting this on. Like before we're racing, as we're practicing, like before everything starts getting real serious, everybody's just having so much fun. And it's still, even though it's gotten a little more serious here because we've got so many more entries, it's still like a fun party, right? We still have a significant number of people staying at the track on race weekends and hanging out, and like, you're walking down like, oh, hey, come chat, right? And you it takes 2 hours to walk down the pit runner and try to leave because everybody wants to stop you and say hi and give you a hug. Maybe not at the end. At the end, they don't want to look at you, right? Like, because
Yeah.
whatever happened out there, if they're upset about it, they're done. I get a couple nice handshakes and smiles and thank yous at the end. But the beginning is when, the whole 300, 500 people, whatever it is every weekend, they come in and they're all just happy and smiling and just so excited. That's, at the end when it's all good and it's done, like I take a sigh of relief. Like we did this, we got through this, and I only got 5 emails at the end of the weekend. but the excitement as everybody's gearing up and getting ready to come here, that's the fun, right?
Oh, for sure.
And seeing new people excited to have my series come to their track, when people are like, hey, like we really want you to be here, we want to bring that here and start promoting, like that's super cool. That now I've gotten to a point where tracks like want me to be there, and I'm not going like, hey, do you want to host my race?
Yeah, I can imagine. That's a lot more fun position to be in. So, speaking this weekend, we're night racing. Luckily with Memorial Day, we're able to do it Saturday, Sunday, so kids aren't having to go an extra day out of school on that Thursday.
Yes.
How was this kind of, once everything shifted around, like a no-brainer, because it like we talked about, you've got so many classes. We're still starting, in the heat of the day. We're going to get to the track at 11 a.m. So we're still going to be there, relatively early through the afternoon heat. And then finally things will hopefully cool off in the Texas summer heat. But how much thought was kind of into that as everything fell into place through really probably the month of March with the way everything shook out last second.
Yeah, I mean, this weekend was planned as a night race. So when we had to do our little shuffle and move things around, we really wanted to keep a night race on the schedule, and not every track is prepared for a night race. So we tried to kind of look at what our options were and how we could best sort of keep this night race on the schedule, and what other locations might be able to host it with, a little bit of shuffling we had to do. And it's been a while since there's been a big night race here, and we've never hosted a night race here, so we wanted to give it a shot. And it's a tricky track anyway, so it'll be real tricky and fun and exciting racing out there because it's tight. It's a tight little track in there.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of one of the, more historic jewels, really the only one now on the schedule, right? Rimrock's got so much around it that's so nice and cool. Amarillo, obviously, with what Kyle's been able to do up there, is going to be
Oh
super
yeah.
cool to go to. Such a nice facility. And Allen's new place, not so new anymore, but still definitely at a high standard. And then we come here to one of the oldest tracks in the country, a classic, historic type racetrack that's a little smaller, a little tighter. To me, when I drive into NTK, it gives me the feeling of like going to like a little league ball field a little bit, or like a YMCA soccer field with especially at night when it's lit up, but even during the day, I mean, it's one of the few tracks. It's a nonprofit club, volunteer operated facility, start to finish, for the most part. So,
Absolutely.
how do you describe it? Getting to come back here and trying to keep this place on the schedule.
I mean, they made an effort. They really wanted to be back on the schedule too. So it wasn't just like, oh, hey, let's go back there. There's been a lot of talk of, have we grown out of it? Have we not? And trying to find the balance, right? And not. So we're excited to do this and to do it at night and see how it all goes and kind of redeem ourselves. Last year here was a long weekend. And so we really want to redeem ourselves here and have everybody leave with a good taste in their mouth this weekend.
And, speaking of the track as well, I know you've seen it. I'm sure you probably have gotten texts about it. They've done some upgrades to the curbs and the chicane to try and make it a little less jumpy. The 12 to 16-year-old goobers that we love that race junior and into senior have been causing all kinds of ruckus on Facebook and on social
Oh,
media by messing with everybody about it. So I know they want me to ask already. Bryce Frank was in here, say, hey, can you talk about the new chicane and the curbs a little bit? I know you've already kind of posted in the comments a little bit on there, but your plan kind of going through the weekend of how to manage to try and keep everybody from breaking their backs and breaking their go-karts and keeping an eye on it.
I mean, it's funny because the kids swear they're saving all this time, right? And every like experienced driver, the more, I hate to use the word older, right? The more mature drivers, they know that it's not always faster, right? You can actually make way more mistakes trying to do some of that stuff, even though you think it's faster. It's super damaging on your cart. But we're going to really talk about this a lot more in the drivers meeting and not necessarily individually, but like we're going to be watching him practice how everybody's going over it. But we already have rules in place, right? Like we talked about me studying the rule book, but we already have rules in place about track limits and cutting the track. And, a lot of the conversations being had on social media and the pictures and the videos are legitimately showing them exceeding track limits and or cutting the track. So we will be watching very closely, and there will most likely be a lot of penalties happening, right? But it's really the kids that some of them are very fast, but they don't have the experienced racecraft that a lot of these other mature racers have, where they've learned that sometimes you can glide through the chicane without doing all that curb hopping. But you also see experienced drivers, right? Like you go back like in Orlando, how many people were getting air in Orlando off those curbs? But they weren't exceeding track limits and they weren't cutting the track. They know where to hit it properly to get what they need from it, right?
Yeah, for sure. And Orlando, that whole month was a moving target, even for Andre. All three of those national races there had different pylons in different places, a little bit different rule books for each one. But for the most part, it was a constant, like, all right, let's adjust this here. Let's boom this here. Let's try and minimize all of that everyone thinks about. And I wanted to give you at least a moment on the air to say that that you are, not that you aren't already, because I think every promoter is pretty wary of it. If they weren't, they get told to be wary of it and they adjust pretty quickly of we need to
Wow.
manage the whole thing.
Right. But my understanding, and I could be off by a race, I think they've only had 2 to 3 races with the new curbs, 2 to 3 club races here. And there is quite a difference in the entry and experience at club races than there are at regional races. So we try really hard not to judge what the club racers are doing and like prejudge our regional racers like, oh, they're going to screw this up, we better act on this. Well, let's see if they can figure out how not to screw it up in practice so that maybe we don't have to have this come to Jesus conversation with them like at the drivers meeting about like how silly they're being, right? Or how we're going to penalize them, them like crazy or this and that. Like we don't want to feel like that. So we're kind of wishful thinking that they're going to go out and practice and realize that that is not the way, and we're not going to have to be that harsh. But we also understand that we already have those rules in place, and we've already walked the track and reviewed what areas and how those rules apply. And if you haven't reviewed the rule book, maybe it's worth checking out that SKUSA rule book on track limits and cutting the track and what those penalties are. But not necessarily you, Xander, but just in general. But people should know that if they go back and look at those videos and those pictures that are all over social media, like where the mistakes are actually being made and where the penalties probably would or should have been assessed if they weren't.
Right. Well, on a lighter note to end and wrap up a little bit. Obviously, we that's whenever it's the negative talk. I don't like to end it that way. I think obviously things can get way too hyped up. It's probably not going to be nearly as crazy as anything expected to be. And then hopefully, yeah, it works out where it should, that it's going to be the whole reason they were designed the way they were with the upgrade was to keep the jumping down. So, but track limits is another thing that'll probably help mitigate that for sure. For you, when it comes to, dealing with new families coming in, I guess kind of a good parting word to say of people what to expect and what they should kind of prepare for when coming to a TSRS event for, well, let's say it's a new racer, or especially a club racer moving up to run something a little bit bigger.
Well, we really do try to find a balance in teaching like the club racers that are trying to step up what their experience might be if they go to a national race without being quite as strict, right? Like we're not keeping parents off the grid and only allowing mechanics there, right? Like we don't just have hot grid passes that people have to buy separately. We try to still keep it a fun family environment while teaching you the next level of things, right? Like how many people have come from a club race and messed up a tech form and gotten DQ'd for something so silly. I mean, it's not exactly silly, but in their mind, silly that they wrote the chassis serial number as opposed to the chassis tag number that they were given because they didn't know there was a difference. Or, we try to make sure our tech guys are there and able to answer questions, and that we're there and able to answer questions and talk through some things with them and guide them and learn a lot. So we hope that you're getting this as a good learning experience in addition to a fun family event before you take off into the big leagues. And a lot of people come back, right? They miss it. They have fun because at national it's just so much more stressful, right?
Right.
Even if it's the same exact people there, it's just a different vibe.
Yeah, no, the dynamic's totally different, from those events down to, the regional level. It's crazy. Even series to series a little bit nationally, it's different, but it's such a different atmosphere for sure, And I mean, at your events, right, they're actually, whereas now at USPKS and SKUSA, a lot of times they may not even get to go anywhere near the fastest guys because they might not even make the feature.
Right.
Whereas, at your events, there's going to be only 5 or 10 super, super fast guys that are national level where, you're going to get to be around them a little in practice. You'll get to line up only a couple rows away from them on it and kind of keep gauging yourself and be that happy medium to be like, okay, until I get up to them, then maybe I think it's worth the expense to go versus just to go make laps and unfortunately not get to run the last final. But I'm excited to come back. It's so much fun for us to get to be able to do more and more regional stuff. So obviously, thank you to keeping us around.
Yeah, we love having you.
We're excited to get up there this weekend. So for everyone that wants to watch, remember we start everything Saturday. It's going to be night racing, so it's easy. Have a night in. Enjoy your Memorial Day weekend, Brittany. Thanks as always for the time. I know you've got a lot going on this week, so it means a lot you're able to make time for me here tonight.
Absolutely, anytime.
With that, guys, we have one more commercial break. Braden Eves and Ryan Norberg are in the green room. They're going to join us in a little bit. Big news, obviously, over the last couple days, a lot's changed on the Supercards USA front. Things got finalized that the IMU SSE 175 engine was going to get removed from the pro shifter class. I don't have shifter guys on. That's the news of it. I know there's a lot more to break down of it. There's a lot that has been kind of talks that's led to this decision. It wasn't a knee jerk, and we knew that was going to be the case out of Orlando. But beyond that, what we do have tonight is a couple super fast single speed guys that have been at the Supernats. And the fun part of Supernats is it's a blank canvas every year to go into it, where the series can kind of design any kind of track they want. And there's been a lot of different iterations over even overall 25 years so far, but especially over the last decade, they've tried a lot of different things. Some have worked, some haven't. There's stuff that I can see from the outside, but I've never raced the Supernats. Luckily, Braden Eves and Ryan Norberg have. They're going to join me after the break, and we're going to kind of break down what we think are some of our favorite track designs and layouts and sections and some stuff that we felt like could have been a little bit better. So stick with us for more. Looking for the perfect vacation spot and a family fun weekend where a race breaks out? Look no further than Karting the Coast. Our 10 race schedule is already well underway, with stops at NOLA Motorsports Park in New Orleans and Finish Line Performance Karting in Biloxi, Mississippi, where our podium ceremonies are on the beach. We know how to have a good time and put on a good race, and all that we're missing is you. To find out more, visit kartingthecoast.info. Kart Store USA is a kart parts supplier that racers and retailers can count on when they need reliable advice and service. We focus on servicing all racers with honesty and pride while maintaining customer satisfaction. We carry a full stock of Kart Republic and Tony Kart chassis, as well as IAMI and Vortex Rock engines. We've also got a host of other parts available and in stock, such as products from Rev Performance Materials, Jecco Racing Seats, and more. We have a 100% satisfaction guarantee. And on top of that, if your order exceeds $200, shipping is on us. Check out all we have to offer today by visiting us online at kartstore-usa.com. My pillow just fell. Anyway, let's bring the boys on in. Ryan Norberg, Braden Eves joining us tonight to have a little bit of fun playing Master Track Designer in Las Vegas. First, Ryan, thanks for making time out of your superstar Hollywood schedule. I know, this was an expensive booking. I appreciate the discounted rate.
Of course, man. Of course. I'm rocking 3 hours of sleep right now. So if I collapse mid-show, that's why. Your fault.
Yeah, well, that's okay. We'll keep it short. Braden, I know we got to keep it short for your end as well, but thank you for the time.
Always enjoy being on here.
So let's get into it. Aaron's got a lot of track maps for us to kind of break down. I know, Ryan, you sent me a couple of your favorites. Braden, I know you got a couple of yours. We're going to get into the favorites at the end, but I want to break down some of them that you've run. Braden, you've run a couple more years than Ryan has over the Supernats. Ryan, your first was 2015, 16. Braden, what was your first? It was 13, or was
2011,
it 2011?
Yeah.
So quite a few years of running it every year. So Aaron, why don't you go and throw up the oldest one that we got? I know that we've got the maps up here. Let's see, what do we have? Okay, so this is one of the ones that kind of stayed pretty stagnant, it felt like, through the end of that 2011 to 2014 era. Braden, you put it on the poll on this very similar layout in X30 Junior. So what about this track was so much fun? What about it was stuff that, was maybe not so much? Where do you rank it?
So what year is this? This looks like could be.
I think it's 14.
2011. No,
maybe 11.
This is 2011.
Even further.
So yeah, or maybe 20. Yeah, no, this is 2011. But this is the year that they didn't have any curbs done. This is before they did any sort of curbing ever at the Supernats. I mean, unless they used to do it before then. But this is a good layout. This is like the similar one that they evolved on for 2012, 2013, and 2014. This was before the curbs. It was really tight. It was a good layout, but I think they made it better in the following years after it, to be honest.
Aaron's saying this one's 2014. We'll see if Aaron's right about that one. Ryan, I don't think you probably have too much on this one because we didn't have too much TV coverage from that one, but looking at it, any initial thoughts or stuff from you've heard?
No, well, I mean, I remember, I obviously followed the Supernats for a long time, and this is one of the last years they ran it clockwise, and now obviously this year they went back clockwise. So it was like after this, when they went to the Westgate, everything started going the other way. This was like the iconic first corner that they tried to replicate a little bit this year. I don't think they got it to the same level that they used to. That first corner was it was iconic. Every time the Supernats, the starting photo with 5-6 wide in the first corner is just crazy. I do like, though, back in the day before I got there, I think it was probably a year before I got there, they started doing the curbing. And initially, everybody at the time, you're like, oh, that's a good idea. Like the curbing obviously keeps people off the walls. But the thing is, it makes the racing worse, unfortunately, because you come in a lot tighter now because you can get away with it. So it ends up being a lot of the time the corners without the curbing end up being the passing zones. A lot of the faster corners without the curbing end up being being passing zones. So, yeah, I didn't get to run this layout. It looks cool. It looks like I remember watching it. It always looked pretty difficult to pass. But again, there was no drop downs. There was no, the racing was a little bit different than what we see now. So yeah, it's a cool layout. I mean, it's tight. I remember it always looking like really, really tight watching the videos and stuff. And yeah, when there's no curbing, I mean, all right, you make one mistake and your race is over.
What do we got next here, Aaron? Let's see.
Oof.
Oh, this is a
This is Westgate.
Yeah. So this is the year after
First
they
year of
leave the
Westgate.
Rio.
Yeah, first year at the Westgate.
Yeah, and that turn one hairpin was much less of a 120 than much more of a 180. Where
they had the bumps all right there, and nobody could figure out how to brake there.
Yeah, this one was gnarly. Braden, this one? I felt like was probably one of the hardest ones to pass on, and there was passing there, but you were like sending it really, really hard because the braking zones were kind of short. Besides turn one.
Yeah, I actually like when I look back on this track now, I look on it like pretty well. I remember like being surprised with how bumpy it was at the Westgate when it happened. The layout was like really cool, except that turn 3, 4, 5 combo, like when they initially did it, was like a massive curb, like a one that I did not want to even try to hit, and people were hitting it on the first day, and I had a brand new chassis. I was like, hopefully they just remove that. So like during practice, I was just not using it, and then they ended up removing it. But this was a really cool layout. It led to like pretty difficult passing. It was mainly turn 1 and mainly turn 1 and turn. These corner numbers are messed up, aren't they?
A little bit. I feel like turn 9 had a fair bit. And then I remember seeing like Jarchakrak had his on board in the TV special, and he was able to, it was him and Brennan Baker, and they were like having a bunch of crossovers because they would dive bomb each other in 10 and in 12 because it was like deep enough they could get alongside the guy. I think 10 you could get clear, but then 12 was such a slow hairpin. It was so easy to go wide and just cross a guy up, even if he was passing you from a while back. But this one, what was like, I think turn 9 was interesting because it was still like an increasing exit. And so I feel like with the way that like corner is laid out on the map would kind of keep down maybe a little bit of defending just because you're still turning on the exit of the corner. Like you look at like last corners like Le Mans karting track or like even like Atlanta Motorsports Park where you kind of come back in a little bit towards the straightaway after the main apex, like a decreasing radius, corner maybe adds a little bit. What do you think, Ryan?
I mean, I didn't get to run this one either. I think the next year was my first year, but I remember like watching everybody smash 4. And I mean, you even hear stories about Sargent because that was one of the last karting races he did before, because he went with RFM and came back and ran Supernats that year in senior. And I remember, so I had people that were working with him. They're like, he literally can't hit the curb because his cart was so heavy. And so he would like, I mean, if you were missing the curb, it was like, I remember hearing it was like 2/10 if you drove around versus like over it. And so a guy, like smaller guys were just screwed. So I remember hearing that they had to remove the curb because it was so bad. But yeah, I mean, these layouts, like I sent you some stuff about the Westgate. The Westgate, I thought the racing was honestly pretty decent layouts. Like it was really creative. I thought that like every year at the Westgate, it's like right now they're kind of almost copy and paste, a little bit different, where the Westgate every year was like, it was a different layout, like almost completely. And this one is like super unique. I mean, there's nothing about this that looks like any of the other tracks. Like it's crazy, especially that 9-10 section. Yeah, that's got to be gnarly. It's got to be hard on tires. And 10 to 11 is also, I mean, I didn't drive it, so I can imagine it was really tight. But yeah, I mean, if you're looking at passing zones, you're really looking only at like 6, maybe 7, depending on how the track race, 9, 12, and 1. But I remember 1 watching the onboards, and I mean, it was like crazy bumpy. And like you had that incident with John Paul Southern where he almost died on the first lap because he went straight through the barrier. So yeah, dude, it looks like a crazy layout. I mean,
this was definitely like one of the layouts that I think was the coolest to sort of do a hot lap and like push on, because I remember when we got into the final, like this was a track layout that you had to drive it in there. You had to brake extremely late in every corner and sort of like pitch it sideways into the corner because the track was so bumpy that like if you didn't turn in early and like try and force it down to the corner, you would just understeer and skip across the track. So it was like, it made this layout super, super technical. And then the last corner, always like, I always thought it was way too tight this year, because it was just so like the last corner here was the corner that you come out of and you would just like be at the limit of the sprocket. Like if you were 1-2 too low, you just have nothing out of the corner.
Yeah, and it was also the starts were just so gnarly in the single speed stuff too, with it being such a hairpin and long straight like going into it. This was I think the last year before the pushbacks came in. It was where we had that LCQ fight in X30 senior. uh, where the whole field was just like you just kind of got on the guy in front of you's bumper and like broke and like held on, and then you just hoped you didn't get like washed out. If you stayed on him, then he was the one going wide and you weren't. What do we have next, Aaron?
This one's
Oh,
good.
so this was this still Westgate? This was still
Yeah, this is
Westgate, wasn't it?
This is 2000.
Oh,
This is
yeah.
my first year.
This is 2016.
Yeah, this is championship year for you, Ryan. So break down this one a little bit.
No, I mean, I like this one a lot. Honestly, this is probably one of my favorite layouts, and it's one of the worst results I've had at the Supernats, other than like 2019, I think, or the year Cooper won. But honestly, the whole design I thought was really good. I normally don't really like the 1-2 double hairpin deal, just because you block for the one, and then you're also the inside for the next, and you can block for the next. But the thing was about this one is like if you block for one and you block for two, you had this chicane that, if you entered it too tight, then you ended up really wide in 6, which that was a passing zone. So actually, like if you were over blocked for 2, then going into 6, you were like pretty vulnerable. And so you could always stuff somebody down there. And then that next corner 7 was a passing zone. And then that like I think it's turn 9 to 10, that big right hander I thought was so cool. Like that wide, you're going so fast through there, and then it follows it up with like such high speeds with like a tight hairpin, which was just like another good passing zone, where it just like it led to a ton of good opportunities where you could lay back, and like you just had a lot of places to make passes. And then like 11, I always just because I think I like pushing the limits. 11 was one of those things where it was like if you push too hard, you're in the wall. And so it was like you're always on that fine line. I mean, Marin was a perfect example of it, of like somebody who just went a hair over the limit and your race is done. And I like tracks like that. I mean, I think it pushes the drivers. You feel way faster than you are, and it's like that's like proper street racing, is where you're like on the wall. And every time through 11, I mean, you're coming through there trying to get as good a run as possible on the straightaway. I mean, you're just scraping the wall every single time trying to get by there. So this is my favorite layout, I think. I mean, it was a lot of fun. I mean, I didn't even do that well. This is my first ever Vegas, so it was kind of a shock. I was just kind of like in awe of the whole event. But this layout, I think, kept the racing open enough that there wasn't like the follow the leader blocking, and then also it was just a cool layout. I mean, just if you look at that racetrack, you're like, oh, that's a pretty tough track.
Yeah. And I remember this year again was one of the years that the track was very bumpy. And I was, like Ryan was just saying, like I was one of the lighter drivers in senior at the time. So I was probably like 120 pounds and had a lot of ballast on the go-kart. And I remember that turn 9 was a super fast sweeping right-hander, and my go-kart was just like bouncing over the bumps the entire time I was driving. And that's like part of the reason why this track was so difficult. And there was a bump right before the apex of turn 11. And if you went in too hot, you'd get over the bump, like would send you wide. And that's why everyone ended up in the wall there, was because it was super tight on the exit and you had to roll a ton of speed, but it was pretty bumpy. But this is a good layout, good technical layout. Turns 1 and 2 were super, super wide, like way wider than you ever needed. So you could run like 3, 4, 5 wide through there at the start, and it wasn't really an issue. And you could also lunge people from like way far back, because you could just turn in super early. And the track was like, I swear it must have been like 8 carts wide on entry and exit. So you could just send it in from way far back, and like they might over under you, but there was like multiple lines almost. It was almost like a dirt track where you could like throw a slider line in there and you could just go wide and you'd be fine for the next corner.
Yeah, I think this one ranks up as probably one of my favorite like final sectors too. Like if you look at like the way the race ended up, probably one of the like we've seen a lot of over the last few years either runaways or if it is like a battle at the end, it's like a block fest. And if the guy kind of is able to get rooted out of the way or not, or he gets over undered. But this one, like the way Jake Craig won it was he stuffed DeMello into 10 and was from way far back that he didn't think he needed to block. But even if DeMello would have blocked going into 11, he'd be so messed up by going so low and so slow out of 10 that by the next corner being a left-hander too, it's tougher to block that because if you end up washing out wide on exit, you get crossed over easy going there, and then it would have continued. So I like that. What do you guys think of the bottom right section where it was that kind of weird triple apex left where you could kind of pass a little bit going in, but you also like went wide in one of the two short shoots?
See, the funny thing is like that corner and the next corner are the same corner. It's literally just the track map doesn't really show it the same, but like when you're actually smoothing out that arc, it ends up being like almost an identical, super fast, kind of bumpy left that you would just kind of slide through all the way in. And then your cart would grip up, you'd throttle up, and then you'd immediately be turning right for like an eternity. And that was a really cool section because it was pretty difficult to make the go-kart work for that long a duration of a corner.
What do you think of it, Ryan?
I don't. To be fair, I don't really remember that section that much. I think it's more kind of like what Braden was saying, where it was like it was just setting you up a lot for that big right-hander. But this whole layout was like honestly 9 and 10 and 3, 4, 5 were my favorite parts of the racetrack. I mean, it was my first Vegas, so I didn't really get to experience the whole the standard turn number 1 that was basically the same way for 15 years or however long it was. But I thought this one raced really well. I thought that a lot of the stuff, I think it's like you said, Xander, where it's just a lot of the tracks sometimes get to the point where when it's close, it's a block fest. And when it's stretched out, it just stretches out. I mean, and this one was one of the ones where it was so hard to block because if you blocked into, and like I said, into 2, you sucked into 6. And if you blocked into 7, then you really struggle through 9. And then if you blocked into 10, then you're just like dead going on to the straightaway. And if you defended in the last corner, then you're like you're probably going to get crossed over going into the first corner. Like Braden said the first corner is so wide. It was like there are times where it was like if you could almost hold it on the outside in 12, like if somebody didn't have their nose all the way up the inside of you could. There's so much space you could just hold it. And so I don't know. To me, that one, I started that final 20 something or 30th or something. I crashed in one of the heats, but I remember I was able to finish inside the top 10 and I was running the leaders down because they were racing so hard. But I didn't ever struggle really passing people. I was just kind of I was able to get by people and get going. It felt like a regular racetrack, where people would block, but it wouldn't, it wasn't so Mickey Mouse, for lack of a better word. It didn't feel like it was so tight and congested the whole time.
Yeah, I think it had a good balance of a decent amount of passing zones, but where the blocking wouldn't hold you back. We switched from that. Aaron, can you pull up 2017?
Yeah, if I can just get go on, Xander.
Yeah, to me, this one, especially with the triple hairpin, I felt like there was so much time lost from watching onboards of you guys when you would block. There'd be sometimes it would look like because the corners were so wide, the hairpins were at least, that you could low line and you wouldn't lose a lot of time. And then on the flip side, you'd see guys would block and it'd be 3 seconds instantly there. And then the same with the switchback hairpins in the back, the back-to-back hairpins, just it made it where the pack spread out a whole lot easier. One guy could slip away and it would then you spend 10 laps running it back down again.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think the triple stack of this triple stack of the first 3 corners are not my favorite. I think 2 is okay, but yeah, I mean, Braden was one of the reasons why it's not my favorite because I guess 4 laps. I'm like, oh my God. You just couldn't get by.
Oh my gosh, I let you by in that race.
No, but
I let you by and then you
didn't
blocked.
have any
You were one
option.
of the people that blocked and lost a ton of time after I was like, I look back, I blocked the first time because I thought you might lunge me and I wanted to protect the lunge. But the next lap, when you were all on me, I was like, okay. I swung out wide, you went by, and then you proceeded to block for 3 corners
Well, 'cause I
and
was freaking
you
out.
honestly screwed my race because I tried to let you go and try to slot in, and then you blocked and I got screwed over by like 5 guys.
Yeah, no, it was a tough race, that one.
Yeah, I remember that was not a favorite one for you. Wasn't that was a rough one up until the final for you, wasn't it? Or was that good through the
For
heats?
me or for Braden?
For you.
Yeah, I was terribly slow the whole week until the final. It was basically, well, no, not the final. I was pretty fast to the heats, but I qualified, I think, 31st. Finished 5th or whatever, which isn't bad. But yeah, it was not my best weekend. I still don't mind that track. I like that track too. I thought it was like just as a racetrack, it was a fun. Like what I really liked was the middle section. I like those big sweeping corners. I thought they were fun. You know, it like that whole section there that led into 7 I thought was pretty interesting. I didn't really like 8, 9, 10. That wasn't super fun. I thought 12 was a bit too wide, but 11 was good. 13 I thought was fun. Yeah, I didn't mind this track that much. Like I thought the only thing that I had an issue with is kind of what we were just talking about is like when I don't like the tracks where it's like if you block, you lose so much time, but also it's like you can just hold everybody up. And with the pushbacks, it's like you're running a train behind. So, you know, when they open up a little bit and let you race a little bit, which, you know, 11, 12, 13, it was kind of one of those things. 12 was really, really wide, which is probably what I didn't like about it. It was like too big for a hairpin. But you could possibly get the guy in 13, or, you know, you could go in 11 because, you know, or coming out of 11 into 12. So it wasn't so bad. I didn't hate this layout. I thought this layout was pretty fun. Just the first 3 corners.
Yeah. The other thing that looked awkward, what did you guys think of the chicane down at the bottom? Because that looked to me like it was such a bottleneck. You know, like there was 2 things that splits a pack up, right? At least on the single speed side. And that's where like there's a lot of blocking, or when you go to like a quick single file section off a straightaway, you know, I mean, like Mooresville with Trackhouse has the chicane. You got to get single file for that. That can get a little awkward, but this was like even more so where, because you were coming out of 7. So is that 7 or out of 7. So slow into 8, 9, 10. That like through like 8, you had to go super slow. Then there was curbs. So you can clip the curbs, but it went from like, cause it was a passing zone going into 8. Like a lot of guys would pass there and then it would just hurt a lot of time. Like, what do you think, Braden?
I honestly loved that section because this year was probably the most fun track to drive. I don't think this was my favorite track overall, but this was the most fun track to drive. And that section was one of the reasons, because the curb was done perfectly. Like you had to go right side tires, like just on the track, and then you basically whack it with almost your whole go-kart. And it would land, and you'd immediately, as soon as it landed, you'd rotate, you'd be on gas, and you'd be flat out all the way, like ripping through that fast right, fast left combo. I thought it was like one of the sections where, like, if you nail it, and you can get close every lap, but like when you nail it, you gain like a solid 2/10. So I thought that was a really cool section of corners for me.
Yeah, I liked it too. I thought like it was sketchy at times, but you could still pass going into it because it was pretty slow. But like Braden said, like I like tracks like where it's tough enough that the better drivers start to weed themselves out, and you also can make up for like shortcomings sometimes in setup or performance. Like you can outdrive things when the track's so simple. It ends up becoming like a setup game really, and like an equipment game instead of being a driver track. And like this one where you set up like chicanes like that, like there were in the previous year in Super Nationals 20 with the big sweeping arc and the chicane through the middle of it, it allows for like a good driver. You can get in there and like, you know, my car probably wasn't the best, I don't think, but I remember through that section, like I would mob those curbs and I just pick up like you said, like you could pick up like 2/10 if you hit it right. And if you're willing to like push it to the limit and get like on the inside curve, get so close to the barrier and like really push it, you could get some extra time out of it. And I don't know, I liked it. I thought it was fun too, because if you're fast in there, you're passing into 11 as well, which I liked because I was quick there. So I was always getting a good run into 11.
Yeah, for like, you mentioned earlier, Ryan, about how, the curbs do kind of take away from the racing because it gets a little more narrow. But that one, with the way like how pushed over the right apex was, where it wasn't like just a straight shot fly over, of how much you could gun it up and throttle up and jump over a curb like straight, where you were actually like angling the cart onto it. Is this like thinking like probably the best use of the curbs, like in terms of actually having to have them part of the line while not being just like a motocross whoop jump?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question, to be honest with you. I can't tell you. I mean, I think it was a good use of a curb because I liked it. I also think you probably could have done without it, but it definitely wouldn't have had the same vibe, honestly. Because like when you're talking about like, let's talk about like the chicane that they put in on the past 3 layouts, like the last little chicane before the last corner, the last 2 years they've been doing it. Yeah, like whatever. Yeah, those ones, those could use, they have curbs there this direction. I mean, which year is this? This is 22. Okay, so this direction, they didn't have curbs there, and it wasn't super good. And then last year going the other direction, they did have curbs there, and people are jumping it and stuff. And so I don't know what the best use of it is, because honestly, I didn't like the curbs being there. I just don't really like that section of the racetrack, to be honest. I don't know. It was a good use of a curb. It's difficult because the problem is with the curbs and everything is like you don't know until you're on the racetrack driving it. Like you don't know anything until they actually get out there and they drive it. Even when they do their little like pace lap or whatever before, you don't know until you've driven it. So it's kind of one of those things like, yeah, you put the curbs out there, and the curbs are better, obviously, for the racing. Like it helps the racing out. I'm not saying we should go back to old school style, but when they do leave a few corners without it, I like it. I think it's kind of tradition. It's good to do that when they just kind of mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, and I agree with that, honestly. When it comes to like curbs, like I like having the curbs, especially in standard corners where you're not going to be using, like if it's a hairpin, you can put a curb on the inside. Nobody's going to be hitting the curb. People are going to be trying to stay off of it. But I like how with the curbs, you can actually see a lot more. And for me, it's helped like to see up the road, even at the starts, if there's a crash, whatever. I think it definitely helps with safety a little bit,
Yeah.
but also in the chicanes, like I was just talking about 2017, they did a chicane right where you could use the curb. It wasn't going to destroy your chassis, and it was technical and it was good. Like that's a curb that I do like, but like the layout that we just ran last year, we were going the backwards direction. That turn 2-3 was pretty not fun to go through, at least for me. I don't know if it was just the way my chassis was handling or what, but those curves were just so annoying to hit, and I wanted to stay off of them, but I couldn't. It was way faster to hit them.
We're talking about 20
last year.
Oh, last year. Yeah. I was not happy with those either. I thought it would be better because they did. So the thing was like last year they did, I guess it would be like, yeah, turns 2 and 3 had curbs, but then 4 and 5 didn't. And I feel like they should have switched that. I think 4 and 5 would have been better with some curves, because then you could maybe get over the curb and get more to the left to make a pass. Where the other ones were just like really awkward. It was like, unless you were Danny, no one was really like making a lot of time up through there. It just was like awkward if you went around him. It was awkward if you hit him. But yeah, I think that if they would have switched the two and allowed you to get over the curb so you can make a pass, I think it would have been better. But it was kind of like, yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things, they put it there because they don't know how it's going to race. And then, we get out there and try it, and it doesn't race the same way that they thought.
Yeah, it gets locked in, right? So that's, I mean, like the takeaway I feel like is, number one, putting it, if you put a curb in a place where it definitely shouldn't be hit, right? Like a hairpin, both from a safety side of seeing around the corner if it's early in the lap for the starts, but it almost is kind of like like a joker lap almost in a way, like it's something you use in a pass. If you send it on someone and they start to crowd you down, you can like go up onto it, but it's not part of the normal line. And then the other thing, like the thing that sticks out to me about the 2017 layout with it is because it was backed up by like 2 more corners. Like if you weren't gunning it up really. I mean, you were, but you were gunning it up at the very end of that first left. If you had it down, from what I could tell from the onboards, right? Because you were still having to set up for the right, and you couldn't just like go narrow into the right and wash out to the left, because then it's going to hurt you too much, because it was still that left going on the straightaway. It wasn't as protruding, I feel like, as the track map ended up being. Like that left was still kind of easy to get around. It wasn't like a full turn the wheel back around it. But if the speeds are slower, where you're using it more to set up for a corner versus like jump and just be straight into the corner, then I feel like that's more like a driver technical curve. Like that's, to me, that's like the 2 things taken away from everything you guys are saying, is that having one in the hairpins where you don't touch it at all, and it helps for visibility, and then helps if you get narrowed into a pass, is cool. But then if you want to put it in where like maybe it adds a little bit of a driver difference, over just easy corners and a track that's just going to be on how good your go-kart handle and how good your motor is if you keep the speeds low. And I think the speeds were kept lower because it was doubled up behind it. It wasn't just a left-right chicane, or even, we go back to that year at the Westgate, right? This was a left-right-left, but because that you didn't have to set up for that right at all, it wasn't protruding enough. Like, to me, that the 17 layout's like an improvement on the 15 one, because the 15, that's probably what they wanted. They wanted you to clip a little bit with the front tire, clip a little with the front tire, and then get out, so you're set up good for 5. But it ended up being you just straight lined over 4. And so then when they made it tighter, it looked better, where now you have some driver technical parts. Because we look at, obviously the most recent layout we've been running, and this is where we get to where we've been the last few years, where there's been a couple runaways, but for the most part, going this direction, there's just not enough that the driver or go-kart can make a difference. It doesn't have enough different kinds of corners. When it's all just stop and go stuff or flat out, everyone's within 2 to 3 tenths,
Well, I think there's more than just like, to be honest, I mean, I won on this one. I'm not, and I didn't mind it in 2019. Yeah. So 2019, before COVID, I didn't mind that layout. The problem I have is like 2 with that weird point at the beginning of it. It's weird. It's not a hairpin. It ends up like bottlenecking everybody up right there, and you like really have to like stab the brakes almost twice on the apex. And it like, and with the bumps and everything there, it ends up making this really uncomfortable transition for the karts, and passes end up becoming extra sketchy because the apex is so early that you have to like almost pod the guy out. If they were to shift the apex over a little bit, that creates a little wider entry, and everybody's going to be, you can make more passing that way. But I didn't mind 2019 when they went to the speedway. They did the same layout, but they just like everything was just way tighter, and it wasn't bad. I thought the racing actually ended up being decent, because when you make it tighter, you end up having to set up a little bit more for all the corners, right? So it ends up everybody's a little bit wider on the entry, which made the passing a lot easier. I felt like, even though it was tighter and there are sections that are a bit more difficult, if you pull up that layout, we'll go back up to that real quick. If you pull up so from on this one, this is 22. So this would have been, what is this, 2019?
Yeah.
It's 2019. So so from 2 to 3, that was flat out, right? Through 3 to 4, that was all flat out. Where when you did it in when we went to the speedway, 2, you actually ended up having to set up quite a bit, off of 2 to get through 3, which made 4 another passing zone. So, they shrank it, and it wasn't as fun to drive, but it ended up making the racing a lot more technical. And I think that's one of the main things that, if I were to design something, it's like, create passing zones, but don't have it where it's, one corner right after another. I always say it where I've talked about before, we were talking about track layouts that I like. And it's like, I like 1 or 2 passing zones following each other, and then create a couple corners where there's no passing zone, and then go back to 1 or 2 passing zones right after that, because you get some breathing room. When it's just passing zone, it's just like you block every single corner, and then you get to 3 corners where you can't it's just like flat out corners, and then it's just everybody's single file, and then it's just block, 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 block. Where it's like if you have a mix of things where people can get a run, or you create some opportunities where people are going to make mistakes, then it opens up areas where, it's not just a block fest, and you get cool races like you did where Craig won the, you know what I mean? You get opportunities where a guy can come from 10th or whatever and work his way through, where now it's kind of like you're in the top 5. That's all right. And, it's Vegas, so anything can happen, but you got to kind of be in the top 5 to be, have a real shot at the win.
Yeah, like you're playing the lottery more of if someone botches a pass to get by versus like carving your way on up. I mean, that I think like if it is the biggest race in the world, it's the race that everybody wants to win, and I don't think it should be, just surviving the draft, right? Or surviving like pack decisions. I mean, credit to Ben Cooper, one of the best go-karters, of the 21st century. Right. But his win with some sick outside passes was because Travis Anuto was blocking and just got booted out of the way.
Yeah.
Like that's not how I'm sure he would have wanted to win it. I'm sure he would have much rather just, outmaneuvered all these guys. And he did, but he did by just being in the pack and then avoiding the crash.
And that's like a genius. So
yeah, well, exactly. Right. Like
that's how many races has he won that he wasn't the fastest guy? I mean,
100%.
2 of his 3 world finals are the same way,
And I don't want to take it away because
no.
obviously deserved to win, but because I mean he's a G, like he is a bad dude behind the wheel, and such a, like you said, such a smart guy, even when he doesn't have the best package on the racetrack. But like, where it was him, it was playing the other drivers in terms of like 2 or 3 of them ahead and then seeing how they were going to take each other out, versus like Jake's win on Zach was playing the one guy how to carve his way around him. That was super cool to get by, and something of a balance too, right? Because like you look at that 2017 track, and not only the first thing that comes to mind about that super layout from the Westgate was the Travis Anuto win, but even then, like Fields was spread. Like that one, I felt like because it was the longest one, but also it had almost, I don't know, like it doesn't look like it has a whole lot of technical stuff, but it had probably one of the biggest lap time spreads too.
Yeah.
Looking back on the years, like there's some fine line to it where we don't want it where it's how a couple iterations of the most recent layouts been, where it feels like we're all 3/10 apart by the end of the first practice day, but it's almost like too much, when we're not even racing each other at all. We're separated by a good bit here.
I think one of the other things that honestly ends up making the biggest difference when it comes to how the track races is how the power band ends up matching up with the layout. Because like last year, the tight corners were so tight and the straightaway was so long that we ended up being on the rev limiter literally
the whole time,
quarter of the way down the straightaway. So it made it for one extremely engine dependent, and for 2 it made it impossible to, like, I could never say, hey, I think my cart's rolling better, let me just go down a tooth to get off the like to try and hold it on the bottom, because I would just lose so much time on the bottom end. The better tracks are the ones where they don't have too long a straightaway, because you want the track to be more tight and be able to run a big sprocket, but you don't want to have to be on the rev limiter. You want to make it like tight enough, or not, I should say fast enough to where you don't need that big a sprocket, but then also a long enough straightaway where it makes sense to where the faster drivers are going to be probably on a lower sprocket.
It's one of those things. I mean, it's hard to do because it's like we're like, make the most competitive track that's the least engine dependent with the most space, and that's the least bumpy, that's the most creative. It's like we're asking so much. It's hard, but I think there's some times where it's kind of like we always say with the rock guys when they do their tracks. It's like no double apexes. That's bad. Okay, we can all agree like double apexes not so good. And then when you stack hairpins one after another, we've driven it enough time to know that's also not good. So it's like, okay, the big mistakes, I think we can learn from, outside of that. I mean, we're all just talking, and that's what this whole show's about, right? But like,
Right.
I hope the SKUSA guys aren't listening to this and they're like, dude, they want everything. They want passing zones, they want no straightaways, they want enough straightaway, they don't want to be on the limiter, but they want bottom end, and it's like, it's difficult. I mean, it's hard to design a track for everybody. I just think, we can learn from the stuff that we don't like, and that's double apexes, unnecessary curbs that we have to jump, that don't add a lot to the racetrack. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, just doubled up so many hairpins, one after another after another. It's like, okay, we can all agree that is not fun. So let's just stop with that too. And then, go from there. I think it's hard. It's a tough spot to be a track designer because it's always going to be bad. No matter what anybody says, it's always going to be the worst track until like a few years later when we're sitting like this and we're like, oh yeah, no, that one was actually pretty good, because when you're there, it's the worst track layout we've ever seen every single time.
I mean, I remember being up in the booth for 2017, and Bonner came up there because that was one of the years that him and a couple others were consulted with the track design for that year, and he's like, yeah, and he was racing it too, and he's like, haven't driven it, haven't designed it, a couple things I would have done a little different, but it's okay, right? I mean, they're always gonna think like that, but that was cool. And, I got to give, one other thing to credit, probably to help us from getting a little bit of heat off our backs if we have any. I don't think we do. But what was really cool last year was, Neil and, the whole like upper half of the SKUSA track staff, like they made an adjustment on the track walk day of the turn down at the bottom right corner going the direction we were going, where it had that little kink in it, and did everything they could to take that out, because both going forwards and backwards, it doesn't really add a lot. Going forward or going this direction, Brent Cruz won a mini race by sending his cart off a ramp off the curb they had at that corner. Then they put a barrier there the next year. That would bottleneck a lot of wrecks. And then going the other direction, especially with the shifter guys, but even with the single speed too, it would have just shot everybody down the inside. Yeah. So it wouldn't have added to a passing zone. So I think that's one of the coolest things that they've done over the last couple of years. And we've talked about it over the show that like they're getting more and more receptive. All the series. I mean, even in the last year and a half, Rock has made major adjustments. The St. Pete track this year was leaps and bounds better than, the previous year when you ran VLR, and a few other ones have made adjustments that have been cool.
I think if there is one thing that the show does help on, is it helps get our feedback out there, because I think the Rock guys have done a good job at it, and even the SKUSA guys, the same thing. They've come up and they're asking the drivers, which maybe I just wasn't as important of a driver before, but I do get asked, hey, how's the track driving? Do you think we should change the section? Do you think that curve's really necessary to be there? And they listen to, I know I'm not the only driver they're talking to, but they're actually asking our opinion and listening to feedback, which is good. I mean, I'm really, I don't know, as much as we've been talking about it this whole time, I actually do think recently everybody has been doing a good job, especially like even Rock. Like at their last, the Rock, the Rio, the last year that was an impressive track. I mean, I really liked that track. I thought it was a really good job. And even the SKUSA guys, I mean, they, like you said, they were taking out curves, they're adjusting things as the week was going on. They made that track a lot more racy than it originally was designed to be. So yeah, I mean, props to those guys for listening to the feedback and trying to make things better while we're out there.
So we talk bumps too. I mean, I think it's cool that like talking like that 2015 track, like granted the bump into turn one sucked, but tracks where like there's a bump like just right off the line, that's not bad, but just enough to like upset you, I think, is like adds character a little bit to some of these tracks too, at least from the outside. I know the drivers may want just a crystal clear surface or crystal smooth, silky smooth track.
Yeah.
But I thought that the bumps adding a little bit of character was cool, because if you were just a little bit off, then it would exaggerate that. And that kind of goes back to like, we want to get the line almost, at least in a couple corners, to like a razor edge, where you're only hitting it really, really good two laps out of 20, and that'll exaggerate the good drivers out of it more, which, at the Speedway, you guys both ran that year in 2021. Let's talk and finish it up a little bit with what we've got coming here this year. Because again, part of this is they've got a blank canvas again. They've got a much bigger lot to play with, a lot more room to play with. It kind of gets confined because they go out and you think they've got a big lot, and then they look for all the bumps and all the nasty parts, and that's what ends up being the pits, and the track kind of gets confined to the best section of it. But that year, obviously it was a good year for you, Ryan. So, how was the surface there, and what do you think of it?
Well, I think obviously like that year was also like post-COVID, so they really weren't even going to have the race there. Remember, they got canceled on the Rio like weeks before. So, I mean, anything that they hosted that year was a good year because, to be honest, like the layout, obviously they didn't have the time to go there months before and prep and figure out a good layout. They just literally were like, we have a layout that works well. It worked well the previous year. Like, let's just make it work and host a race, which saved, every team's behind that year. I liked it. I grew up in Orlando, but Orlando before it was Orlando that it is today. Like I grew up when it was like, I think it was called CFRS still or something. And I mean, it was a parking lot, and I grew up here in Homestead. So like parking lots are normal to me. Like that's normal racing. So I like the bumps. I don't mind the bumps. Like even when they're in like tough spots, I don't mind the bumps. I think, like I was telling you earlier, I like when you make it harder to drive and you allow for more places for mistakes, especially like going into passing zones. Because like, for example, always into 2, there's a gnarly bump at the Rio. Normally, like depending on how far they stretch out to, but there's like normally like a pretty big, like you hit it pretty good on the way in. And it catches people off because you go to make a pass, you go a little too deep, you smack the bump, you slide out wide, you get over under. So it's like, it just makes the racing a lot more hard. It makes everything a little bit more competitive. I like it. I think it adds character to it. I mean, obviously to an extent, there's some times where they go out there and they fill the bumps because it's too much, but yeah, I mean, I don't mind the bumps. I think it's part of street racing. I mean, if you ever race the Lancaster Grand Prix, I mean, the Supernats is like the Taj Mahal of racetracks. If you're going from that, I mean, that track's bumpy and you're inches from hay bales and concrete wall. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot worse street courses. So like, to be honest, if you're complaining about the Supernats, it's like you really haven't driven. You haven't even driven Homestead. Like, Homestead back in the day was a street course that was turned into a racetrack. And now it's like a proper racetrack, but before it was pretty gnarly. So yeah, I mean, the Supernats has never been like, I've never really like had so many issues with the bumpiness of the track. Normally it's like the stuff that hurts is the curbs. Like when the curbs are in not the best spots, that's where you get the pain. Other than that, everything's pretty normal.
And don't put curbs that only Danny Formal can hit. Because that is also the worst thing. It was Dave Serra back in the day. I feel like he was the guy in X30 Senior that if there was a big curb, you're like, oh man, Dave's got 2/10 on us in that corner already.
Yeah, what a beast, man. Any other thoughts about going back to the Speedway from your end, Braden, for having raced it 2 years ago?
Yeah, I think I actually have some good feelings towards that because I think they have more room, make the track bigger, make the track better. I think that's what we want as racers. The surface was really nice there. Really, really nice there last year. So I think they can sort of sky's the limit for that. I'd like to see them. If I can pick one thing that I would like, I think don't make the straightaway have a 90-degree flat out corner in it, have a slow corner coming onto the straightaway, and have a tight corner at the end of it. I think that's how the engines normally end up, or the gearing ends up working best. But I mean, I think they can do it 100 different ways and make it good. So it's just kind of up to whatever they see. I'd like to see big changes this year.
Got a viewer question that just came in before we wrapped up. It's from Bryce Frank. What did you guys think of speed sports? Braden, we'll kick it off with you for your first visit to drive that racetrack. You've coached there before, but racing it.
Yeah, I love that place. It's definitely one of my favorite circuits for sure in the U.S. now. Potentially my favorite track. It rubbered up well. I mean, the flow of it, super technical. It's very, very smooth. There's literally no complaints from me. I mean, I think we need to be going there on a national schedule every single year from now on.
Ryan, you've raced there before, but
Yeah, no, I don't have any issues with it really. I mean, I think it was a fun track. I think Alan has done a great job at that place, making the facilities nice. And I mean, I was there, I don't know, back when I was on Burrell a few years ago, and the paddock wasn't paved yet and stuff. And he was talking about hosting a big race. And I mean, he's taken all the steps to make it, hostable. It's a nice track. It's a great place. So the racing was a bit tough. I think, that it's one of those tracks where it's easy to block there. Like you can kind of defend pretty easy. But I mean, there's tracks that are like that. So it's one of the big. It's just part of it. It's part of racing there. So yeah, I mean, I didn't have any issues with it. I think it's a good track, and I'm sure we're going to be going back there again. So yeah, no, I mean, I like speed sports.
I think it's cool that he's over the whole little area around it has come up more, right? The water park wasn't around too many years ago, but now that we were really hoping that food truck center. I don't know if you guys knew about what's going on with all those containers, but behind the rental cart track where the VIP car parking is, where there's a bunch of black containers, by the time we come back next year for sure for whatever events go, which it sounds like there could be any of the major national tours touching base there, I think for sure they're going to come back. There's going to be 17 different food truck companies. They're going to each rent a container they'll be able to walk out to go and get food from. They got the Domino's nearby. And did either of you guys stay at the Best Western Hotel where you could walk from?
No, I didn't. We stayed down the road, but it's cool. I mean, it's right next door, basically.
Probably safe for both of you guys now with all of us being of age, because the bar parties down there.
I stayed there at TSRS last year. I know that place.
Trouble, dog.
Yeah, they stay out late, so it's probably good that both of you guys stayed away from that area. But it's a fun hotel. It's cool. I mean, they're just that's like, even though it's so like microscopic in the grand scheme of things, to me that's one of the other cool things stick out. Like, nice facility, easy to get to, close to the airport, checks all those boxes. But this is a kart track. It's literally just like a car race track. It's having like a whole community kind of build up around it that I think is so sick. And the food truck place and everything is going to be a big, cool addition. Hell, I bet you that Domino's probably had its best week ever.
We should sell parking next time. I'm sure they'll do really well.
Yeah, maybe if they stop towing their potential customers away, that might help.
You guys are missing out. It's a great. Keep like one spot open, and you're good.
Yeah. All right. Well, that wraps it up here for this show. Ryan, Braden, thanks as always. Viewers, thanks for watching. Make sure you guys tune in this weekend. Braden and Brian, they'll be in action here later on in the summer, getting underway with more national racing. Of course, the SKUSA Pro Tours in Utah in a couple weeks, the U.S. Pro Kart Series in Newcastle in a month's time. But this weekend, it is our second of 3 night races on the year, so it's easier to watch. Kick back at home, make some dinner, enjoy the racing. I think we go hot on the air around 4 p.m. on Sunday or Saturday, and I think around 3 p.m. or 2:30 on Sunday, and then we go all the way till about midnight Eastern time. So it should be a lot of fun. It's a cool atmosphere. Everybody got to hear from Brittany, and then from there, again, we got 8 straight weeks of racing, which should be so much fun. Ending off with that Miami USA Grand Nationals, which is such a fun event that we'll get to talk a whole lot more about. I talked with Eric Jones. We're going to be there. He's got some cool stuff he's already cooking up to kind of make that event a fun festival. So lots of cool things, lots of stuff to be excited about, and a lot of entries here this weekend. So thanks for watching. See you guys next week.